Down here, things only get better with time. It's why we perfected the art of the scenic route, and why we also love a game that takes all day to play. It's why we know that when we welcome old friends again, everything that's great here will be even better. 'Cause whether it's a long walk, a long lunch, or a long-awaited hello, there's nothing like Australia.
Good morning. Can you all hear me? Great. So good morning to our friends joining from India and good afternoon to our friends from Australia. My name is Vidya Sagrum. I'm the Director of the Strategic Project with Victorian Government, Trade and Investment Office South Asia, and also the Executive Committee member of the Indo-Australian Chamber of Commerce Bangalore chapter. So welcome. I'm pleased to introduce today's session on Edtech Shaping the Future, with a specific focus on acceleration and digital shift in education post-COVID-19. This is very timely, considering the digital transition in education sector and the attraction we see in the business of education during and post-COVID. Australia has over 350 edtech companies, and more than 15% of the Australian startups are focused on education industry, making education technology the second largest startup industry in Australia and a significant emerging growth sector. To complement this, the edtech market is booming in India, attracting big money and big celebrities, including Sachin Tendulkar and Virat Kohli picking up stakes. In Feb last year, I was fortunate to be at the launch of a successful partnership between Australia's leading Deakin University and India's edtech platform Upgrad to offer online program. So this is a classic example of a successful model between Australia and India, and this session aims to discuss these possibilities of mutual collaborations, feasibility of hybrid models, permanence of edtech sector in India, and tech infrastructure preparedness. For this brief introduction, I would now like to introduce the moderator of the session, Mr. Terry Hillsberg, member, New South Wales International Education Advisory Board. Terry has been involved in the online education industry since 1998, so quite a bit of a veteran. He was commissioned by the Australian Government Review of Higher Education Financing and Policy to report upon, amongst other things, the potential risk-approved nature of such education upon the structure of higher education industry. Subsequently, he began founding, investing, advising both K-12 and higher education companies. These companies included startups such as NextEd, My Internet, and Roar Educate. Today, he remains an active investor in and advisor to a number of online education companies. So the floor is yours, Terry.
Thank you very much. So, folks, about 20 years ago, I arrived in Mumbai to set up an online course development team for my then higher education startup. That was in the days when mainly the participation of India in online education was to do course development work for mainly Western companies. At that time, there was very little engagement of Australian education suppliers in the Indian domestic education market, or vice versa. Jumping forward 20 years, this has changed in a number of ways. Firstly, as India has grown richer, its domestic market for digital education products has dramatically expanded. Secondly, the same growth in domestic demand has led to an explosion in the last 10 years for education products. And we now have, according to Holland IQ, the data analytics company, 100 very rapidly growing edutech companies in India, of which most did not exist 10 years ago. In addition, those companies have now led to at least 2 of the global top 20 unicorns in the edutech sector. And finally, these same companies that are expanding in the Indian domestic market have been increasingly present in English-speaking market, other English-speaking markets. At the same time, a common factor is that Australians of Indian background are often at the centre of many of these developments. The Indian diaspora in Australia is a real asset for Australia in competing globally in the edutech space. Lastly, all of these trends have probably been accelerated by COVID-19, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So the format is 5 speakers, each of whom will have an opportunity to speak for up to 10 minutes. And then we will have Q&A following the 5 speakers. And you can enter, if you can see on your screen, the button for the Q&A, which is up in the top right-hand corner of your screen. So can you please put your questions in that place? In addition, could I emphasize that you perhaps turn off your microphone unless you're directly talking? I noticed that some people have got their microphones on. So over to David Linke, who is the Managing Director of EduGrowth, which is Australia's peak organisation in the edutech sector. David, over to you.
Thanks very much, Terry, and thank you very much for the organisers in allowing me to talk about the Australian EdTech ecosystem and put some context about the size and dimensions. So I thought I might just begin with some statistics to give everyone a bit of a foundation to understand the market. We have 600 Australian EdTech companies. They employ 13,000 people, generating $2.2 billion worth of revenue, and of that, $600 million of it is export. So it's an export market for the country. They're spread across the country as you would expect. Generally, these map the same input from the economic development that you would expect from New South Wales or Victoria, and the biggest market, New South Wales, Victoria, followed by Queensland and then Western Australia. 50% of Australia's EdTech companies are what we would call early stage startups. So they're quite small. They've got less than $500,000 worth of revenue. 29% of them are what we would call late stage startups. So that means that they've got a business model that they're working on and they're starting to scale that. And they've got between $500,000 and $2 million worth of revenue. There's established companies which dominate the market, and some of those are global leaders. They are impacting learners around the world every day. And these are companies generating more than $2 million worth of revenue. And finally, and most importantly, there is a really healthy consultant sector in the market. And these are people who are specialists in helping the transformation of education from a digital perspective and implementing technology to do that. You can see that the majority of Australia's EdTech ecosystem focuses on providing services to K-12 schools. And over the last few years, we've seen a bit of a merge or sort of a bit of a migration from companies from focusing on higher ed to start focusing on vocational training, and now workforce training is becoming a dominant player, and you'll see that a little bit in a slide in a second as well. This shows that the market in Australia has doubled in the last 5 years. Since 2015 through 2020, the market doubled in size. And just to point out a couple of things, just note that early learning and childhood is a reasonably new sector and it's tiny in Australia. And most interestingly, what you're seeing is that this workforce sector has always been around, but it's really accelerated in the last few years, which I think follows that global trend of connecting education to the workforce and starting to think about it and starting to think about who is responsible for the education and employment of people. EdTech product focus from Australian companies. You can see that 50% of Australia's EdTech companies are focused on producing content or content management systems for existing education providers. But we also touch admin, student management, learning management, and then ultimately still again this consulting group. Note that the consultants are here are slightly larger than the consultants I mentioned before. It's because this is also companies that are providing consulting services as an add-on to their platform. The business model in Australia is heavily focused on a B2B market. We are providing tools and resources and services to build and improve learning within existing providers, whether they're schools, universities, TAFEs, or even now corporate training. But there is an emerging market of B2C that's very different to most places, and especially in India, where it's very heavily a B2C market, and lots of companies struggle with the B2B space. The Australian EdTech ecosystem is an export market. So if you are an established company, meaning you are generating more than $2 million, every single one of those companies is exporting. On average, they're exporting 37% of their focus is offshore. Even those companies who are getting to growth stage, 84% of them are exporting, and they're exporting 13% of their revenue. So this is a market that is taking Australian education to the world through the digitisation of the Australian curriculum. Just a reminder, $600 million of this sector is export revenue. And I thought I would leave you with an interesting statistic. And that is, if you think about the workforce in Australia, it is heavily, in education, is heavily dominated by females. 77% in the K-12 schools, 58 in university, 58 in the workforce space. But the EdTech sector is the one exception to this. It is heavily dominated by men. And that's a really interesting idea when you start thinking about education, innovation, and not EdTech, and start thinking about what the next phase of the things that we're going to do. I'll make these slides available to you through the organisers at some point. So that's my quick, short, sharp intro to the EdTech sector. Over to you, Terry.
Thank you very much, David. I'd now like to ask Ravneet Pawar, Deputy Vice President, Global and CEO South Asia at Deakin University, to give us a bit of a chat about how what's going on in higher education and reforms and how COVID has impacted future prospects. So over to you, Ravneet.
Presentation. Hi, everyone. It's just excuse me. I'm just going to share my presentation here. Can you see it? Can you see it?
Not yet.
Okay. So while we are just sorting this out, I don't know what's happened. We did try to do this, but anyway, we'll just try and carry on. What I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have been looking at the sorry, where is the presentation?
Share. Cancel. Share.
Sorry, guys, just give me 1 second.
Share.
Can you see it now? Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, Ravneet, we can see it.
Fantastic. So sorry about that glitch. I'm going to talk a little bit about where the interface between education and technology really happened and what's our story going forward, because I think that that's going to be where the future is. And rightly, today's topic is talking about EdTech and shaping the future. So basically, this real trend started about 10 years back. And if you actually look at what the digital decade really figured out in the last 10 years is personalized demand and the user-centric approach to where technology interface with education happened. What is the future? What does the 10 next years look like? It's a full economy focus. It's going to actually look at prioritization of innovation, agility, scale, and security. It will transform the operating model for higher education institutions around the world, and it will enable new business models that will emerge going into the future. Over the next decade, artificial intelligence won't replace managers, but managers who use AI will replace those who don't, is what is my firm belief, which was in the Harvard Business Review's cover story as well. And this was in July 2017. So folks, we are 3 years away from it, and we can actually see the huge impact of the edutech sector into basically higher education institutions. Engaging a cohort of one is important, but in the new digital era, data is no longer going to be just for business decision making. Today, folks, the key value of data is empowering personalization and prediction to engage the customer, that is you. So it's really a customer-focused approach that's going to go forward into the edutech sector. And then COVID-19 happened. and that accelerated the digitization process leaps and bounds. In this new phase, in the next 3 to 5 years, the way I see it, it is going to be completely shift to digital and fundamental redefine the overall business landscape. I wouldn't say a complete digital, but I would say a hybrid model going into the future is what we see likely to happen. Collaborative ecosystems of stakeholders committed to digital transformation is set to be the game changer. A catalyst for accelerated innovation in education is what is going to be important. And this is very important for institutions around the world in the higher education sector. Where it is going from a focus on buyer's market with the disrupted models into institutional agility. And if we don't put all of these three things together, we will not have a solution that the institutions will be able to provide to the world and engage in the right phase as we go into the future. All of these things, if you look at the institutional agility, right from looking at industry packages to accessibility to micro-credentialing, automation, use of AI, these are things that are going to change the way education will be delivered and will be taken up by the consumer behavior. What has been the impact of COVID-19 on education in India specifically? We were all caught off guard here. Institutions forced to close campuses and teach online. More than 32 crore learners in India were forced to go online overnight. There was lack of infrastructure, and the concept of online curriculum, including assessment, caused massive gaps in learning. Overseas education dreams were cut short. Travel restrictions forced students to look inwards. Return on investment on studying international courses online did not feel justified. Then we were very, very pleased with the national education policy that came into 2020. What are the 10 highlights of the national education policy? It talks about emerging study areas like robotics, coding, AI as part of curriculum. Skills such as scientific temper, computational thinking, logical reasoning became an evident part of what is going to be the future of higher education in India. World-class education, multidisciplinary approach, inclusion of liberal education, regulatory reforms transformation, expansion with quality and access, research ecosystem, academic freedom, public funding, public philanthropy, internationalization, accreditation, and digitization. All of this is part of the national education policy. And friends, this is where I see the changing game in India, and specifically between India and Australia. My previous speaker talked about how the Australian edutech sector is growing and the focus on the Australian education sector. And I'd like to focus on bringing that into fruition into India, because that is what India will need to actually implement and execute the national education policy. Future of education in India is going to be blended, hybrid, and is going to make sure that EdTech solutions becomes an integral part of where we go into the future. Our bodies here, which is the UGC, the AICT, and all of the others have been in the last, I don't know if you followed the news, those in education sector would have followed the news, are talking about how foreign education institutions can work more closely with Indian education institutions to offer joint programs, twinning programs, hybrid programs, micro-credentialing, and so forth. So there is a huge opportunity for institutions to think about what their strategy with interface with India is going to be for the next 10 years. Approach for India going forward is going to be very focused on demand-centric approach and adaptive strategic planning based on the policy. Basically, I'll just use the Deakin example very, very briefly because I think it is an interesting example. So our interface with technology did start 10 years back, and today we are quite a focus on technology use for student support, for teaching and learning, as well as for building partnerships. The wave of transformational patterns at Deakin in the last 5 years or 7 years has been extraordinary, and that has helped position Deakin as a leading partner in the world, but also a leading institution. Digital learning environment into the future is going to have all of these aspects: assessment, product, discussion forum, curriculum resources, and collaboration platforms. And institutions that have not invested... Yeah, sure. Institutions that have not invested in time, effort, and money will find it hard to go forward into the future. So I'll just wind up by saying that blended learning with industry and intensive and in the cloud is going to be where the future is. It is not the strongest species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rodney. Let's move on. Stephen Rutter of the Scale Institute. Stephen's going to talk about learning design.
Thanks, Terry. G'day everyone, I'm Stephen, and just getting my presentation up. So I really wanted to come at it as CEO of the Scale Institute. I design entrepreneurial education programs, but also as a founding member of an edutech called Utopia. So really I'm here to talk about the immersive and experiential experiences we need to provide our next generation. Need to be flexible, adaptable, and able to change. Okay, so I don't want to talk about my bio because everyone can connect with me via LinkedIn or things like that, but I want to talk about one of my greatest achievements, which is filming Mad Max in Namibia. So I looked after logistics for 1,500 crew members, as well as freight and travel for about 15 months in the Namibian desert. Why I talk about this is that this experience was able to take my learning experiences and apply them to be adaptable, agile, and flexible within the desert. And having at least 1,200 people at night in freezing temperatures and in day 45 degree Celsius days was exceptionally difficult. So I wanted to talk about what we need to improve towards our students becoming the next generation of leaders. So they need to have creativity skills, okay, to ensure that they can be adaptable and flexible for the future. We need to provide them that experience in a domain so that they have subject matter expertise. But most importantly, they need to have intrinsic motivation and confidence to succeed. So as educators, our goal is for students to be uncomfortable with ambiguity. The problem I see that we have with digital student engagement is that we provide too many platforms for them to experience the learning on. Now, I also design for universities in Australia, and I think I've got 5 contracts right now. And within the first 5 slides of our subject, we say that we need to look at all these different platforms, and they don't know where to go. Okay, so how would we solve this? So the way we would solve this is to look at the learning design. Okay, as I mentioned, the flexibility, the relevance, community-based and peer-to-peer engagement, focused on outcomes. So we have spent the last 18 months as a company researching learning, and most specifically learning in that vocational market that David spoke about before. And our extensive research into online learning, and this was before COVID, indicated that only 9% of people that start an online experience complete it. Okay, no one requested new content. Students also use trusted peers and advisors to refer them to the professionals that can help. And when someone identifies that they need to learn something, they often find it difficult to work out how just to start. Okay, many more outcomes that we delivered, and I'm more than happy to share the white paper at a later date. But essentially what we came to, that we wanted to provide this experience that had action-based learning over content. And that is the quickest way for individuals to make progress. And we did this through the lens of traditional learning and a guided action program. Not only they save time, but they save money. So as institutions, the measures of success must change, and they change towards the guiding lights, the bigger tech companies that are in customer engagement. So we look at how much they progress, what is their lifetime value into your institution, how engaged are they, and what is their user engagement, referrals, and acquisition costs. So that's me, and I look forward to your questions.
Yes, so thank you very much, Stephen. I'd appreciate those in the audience, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A section of the screen. We really would look forward to being able to try to address your questions. Thank you. Now moving on to Pratibha Sen, who's an Associate Director, Australia in IDP Education, and she is wanting to talk about digital maturity that COVID-19 has brought and the increased acceptability by matter of chance, not choice, that we see from study online in India. Over.
Thanks, Terry. Hi to everyone. I always think during this period, are we changing the technology, or is technology changing us? I would like to share some thoughts that I have on the experience that we have felt during this period. The pandemic has brought about a lot of changes, and something that I call as a digital maturity that it has brought, with an increased acceptability to study online, use the tools as a matter of chance but not choice. Is this here to stay? Is this a tactical approach or more strategic? How we can leverage this? In this forum, we're all sharing our thoughts about EdTech, about technology, about education and learning in the future of learning, future of work. I'll first like to introduce myself. Like Terry said, I'm the Associate Director at IDP Education, and I'm based out of Gurgaon in India. IDP is the global leader in student placement and also the co-owner of IELTS examinations. Over the last 5 decades or more, we've been assisting students who have study abroad needs. And these students are the ones who have passed out of school or passed out of college, and they want to go and study abroad. Suddenly, when the borders were closed, these students were left to wonder when or how they will continue their education. And like my colleague here and a co-panelist mentioned, that this period actually brought about a lot of shifts into both learning as well as delivery. So we saw during this period how the adaptation at both ends has been, at the university level, at our level as mediators, and with students. During this COVID, like everybody else was grappling at IDP also, we started using more of technology as an enabler to reach out. We started leveraging what we had in our digital space and capacity to reach out to our students and parents, and to reach out to the institution partners that we work with. We were very quick to respond, and we had changed our physical events into virtual events where students could come at a platform and still meet the universities of their choice, discuss the programs, and apply for their higher education. We were quick to respond in changing our way of working to virtual offices, because physical offices were no longer accessible due to safety concerns. We have our virtual offices now, and an approach in which a student at the safety and protection of their home could come and meet our counselors who could give them the expert advice to study abroad. We have other changes also, like the IDP app, which will help the student get updates and be connected. All this engagement was accelerated during this period. The adaptability, the acceptability, the adoption, the speed at which and the scale at which we have done it has increased. And I would like to say the same about students. My idea is during this period, the students have been very accommodating. And we're talking about them over here when we're talking about technology, when we're talking about education, when we're talking about future, we're talking about students. So what we observe is that the students during this lockdown have been very flexible, resilient, and accepting to this change. And we need to see how, as educators or as people who are providing the services, we can leverage this technology, this learning, how we can move forward with it in a manner which is more responsible. What I would like to say that during this lockdown period, online education was widely accepted in India, but still as an alternative and a temporary substitute. However, what it has brought is an increased level of awareness, definitely, and acknowledging that the flexibility with which the students can use these platforms and tools once it is made available to them. This digital maturity is a shift in India. And like I said, it has been accelerated right from the junior levels of school to working professionals to use technology as a means to reach their education needs. I'll break up in two parts. One is the domestic and one is the international. So starting about the domestic sector, we see that right from K-12 to college to upskilling, reskilling of working professionals, or coaching, we see that we have used more technology during this period to reach out and engage. My own daughter, who is in the 5th grade in school, knows how to use Google Meet, knows how to use Zoom, Microsoft Teams. This was not possible earlier. So what this has brought about in children at a very small age itself in India is the increased use of technology to learn and the familiarity, which is a skill. All the students have gained this during this period, and this has been a tough period for learning and delivery, but this has also made them future ready in many ways. The future of work, as we all know, needs quick solutions and a technology-driven approach. With a different outlook and adaptation and awareness towards online modes of learning during this period, I feel that the post-COVID world would have a bigger shift and trend towards in the next few years. And again, talking about domestic, adding up to what Ravneet mentioned about the NEP 2020, this is a new education policy after many decades in India, and it's very ambitious in its plans to build up a path to bridge the digital divide in India and build a digital platform for students. COVID-19 has forced us to accelerate, but amid this, there are two realities which have come out. One is that the digital inequality in India did exist, but I feel that the COVID-19 has exposed it. And the second, that the blended learning approach is a way forward for those who can afford it. I think that in India, the shifting to online education would take time, acknowledging the challenges of technology, internet, the disadvantages associated with longer screen times. But initially, the approach was of remote learning and not digital learning. And unfortunately, a lot of students in India who have limited means of internet and access to digital tools face challenges. Now, on the flip side, now talking about the international education, this is a different audience altogether. International education is for students who are wanting to study abroad, who can afford it, and who are looking for an objective to go abroad for not just the education needs, but for the exposure and the experience. Would these students want hybrid learning? If given a choice, I feel all these students want to go on campus want to be at the destination country where they choose to study. At IDP Education, like I said, we've adopted a lot of techniques during this period and have had a smooth success with virtual events, virtual counseling, and opportunities to engage students on digital platforms. But we feel this omni-channel approach is a vision of a connected community in which we can use technology and give better services to students. And talking about services, the Australian universities, which is where my role of work deals with, have been very forthcoming in helping students during this period. They have given a lot of flexibility for them to choose smaller units, given discounts to students, given a lot of academic support to be aware of how to use these tools to learn better during this period and still get the outcomes and returns. The Australian universities have been very prompt in helping students to help them in the examinations, the assignments, and we have had a lot of students giving positive feedback and testimonials during this period that their learning has been uninterrupted online. With the same view, we are looking at responding to this period in a different way now. In 2020, we were basically trying to evolve and trying to respond to this sudden change. But in 2021 at IDP, we feel that now with the learning, we can make the experiences better, driving more efficiency. And we've taken a lot of feedback from students and our partner institutions how to harness the technology and automation, especially in the education space, to make it more digitally reachable as well as more effective for the users.
Pratibha,
Thanks, Terry.
You finished, have you? Thank you. Okay. Now I'd like to pass along to Mr. Nitish Jayan, who's the president of the SP Jayan School of Global Management, and perhaps he can talk about how his organisation has adapted during the COVID period. Thank you. Over to you, Jayan.
Thanks very much, Terry, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to firstly state that COVID has actually led to a bifurcation of schools and universities who managed well and schools and universities who've unfortunately not been as successful as the first group. I'd like to share our own example of what we've done. But before I do that, let me quickly introduce myself. I am Nitish Jain, the founder and the president of SP Jain School of Global Management. We have currently 4 campuses in Sydney, in Singapore, in Mumbai, and in Dubai. And what's unique about us is we require our students to study at least in 3 of the 4 campuses. Some of them do all 4, but at least 3 of the 4 they visit. They spend a whole term. For undergraduate, they spend a whole year. And after they study, they can intern. So to give you an example of our undergraduate program, they, for example, start in Singapore, then they can intern in Singapore, and then they move to, say, Dubai, and they can intern there, and they move to Sydney and intern there. And once they spend 2 years in Australia, they get even the possibility to apply for a 2-year post-study work visa. And this has really worked very well for us. We started in 2004. And when we started, there were already 10,000 other accredited business schools. So we were looking for a new model. And the new model was global experiences. I know Pratibha spoke a bit about global experiences. We have a lot of first-hand experience on global experiences because that's our model. We were born for global experiences. We are called the SP Jain School of Global Management. And so this was the reason why in just so few years, we already have 4 campuses. And as we speak, we're looking to add on another European campus. So let me share some of my thoughts, what happened during COVID. In March and April of last year, COVID hit us like a thunderbolt. We had no idea what's going on. But luckily for us, we had our own proprietary online learning platform. So when COVID happened, universities all over the world, they moved to online. And when they went to online, they chose either Zoom, the number one choice, or they went to Microsoft, or they went to Google. Now, all these platforms were designed for office meetings. They were not designed for classrooms. They were designed so that people could meet and have an office-like discussion. It was a meeting room online. You could not even make eye contact with your students. In fact, if you have more than 20 or 25 students, you have to flip the screen. So you can't make eye contact with the students. But I'm going to show a demonstration in just a few minutes, a video that is, on how we have developed our own proprietary online technology, custom designed for classrooms. You can have even 60 students in the class, and the professor can see every single student, and not only see the student, make eye contact with the student, and you can have a face-to-face conversation with the student, and thereby making the learning so much more engaging. Apart from this, we have a lot of other features built into the software, which includes online or real-time, polling. You can ask questions. You can have breakout rooms. You can do all sorts of things, online. And hence, because of this new technology, our student numbers actually grew last year. And so where universities all over the world were facing a declining number of students, for whatever may be the right or wrong reasons, we actually saw an uptick in students. I'll give you the example of our EMBA online that actually grew 4 times compared to last year. Why? Because they love the technology and they felt that this is a fantastic technology, and they would much rather join SPJ compared to some other school that may still use technologies like the ones I've already mentioned. So I'm going to ask the technical host, Diksha, to play the video, and after that I can talk a bit more. Diksha, are you there?
Welcome. How is everyone today? It's great to see you all. I assume you've all read the Trust Sphere's case. So, Jim, in Singapore, as the Trust Sphere CEO, what's your most important strategic decision to make today?
So I think that we should pursue people analytics with today's platform.
I think we already have a response here from Dubai. Dr. Gulnara?
I think we need to develop what our customers ask for.
So it sounds like we have 2 approaches to growing the company. Let's take a poll and find out what everyone thinks. Ten more seconds. Who answered C? Shirley in Singapore, what is your other way and why is it better?
We could also manage an open innovation portfolio with high-tech startups. That way we can do both and innovate beyond our own resources.
Not a bad option. What I'd really like to do now is diverge, converge to come up with some creative solutions. Let's split out into virtual teams for 10 minutes. I'll assign you on a random basis. Each team should choose a spokesperson and then come back ready to tell us what's the core problem. Artif from Mumbai, Why did your team say the CEO is the real problem?
Well, the case says he recognized people analytics to be crucial to their long-term success.
However, the world's fastest growing region is Asia, and the Asian clients wanted risk analytics.
Understood. Thank you, everyone. It's a wrap. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, Diksha. So actually what you saw there was 20 television screens, and students were on these screens, real size, and they could really interact. The professor could see them, as you saw. Students could see the professor. They could go into breakout rooms. So when we look at EdTech, and we look at what is the single most important element of EdTech, it is surely digital learning. Many of the past speakers, I know Pratibha and Ravneet and maybe the others also spoke about hybrid learning. So hybrid learning is partly online and partly face-to-face, combining the best of both. And the extent of hybrid would then depend on the level of education. When you look at undergraduates, they are more interested in coming to the college for the college experience or the social experience. But when you look to the workforce learning, they're more interested in the learning aspects, and they don't really care so much about the college experience because they already have families and they are at work. So the age of the student and the maturity of the student has a very big bearing on the extent you can do online and the extent you can use hybrid as a consequence of online. And I think, online technology has so much to benefit even the on-campus learning experience for students, because till now, face-to-face learning is largely audio. So someone spoke and you listened, but did you participate? Could you use technology? How can you combine online and offline together to create an even superior learning experience? I know somebody talked about personalization, and that is surely going to be a natural outcome of education going forward, but it can even be done on campus and need not be just done on online. So I'm going to end here. I think I have more time, but I don't really want to spend more time. This is the main point that I wanted to demonstrate. It's not just talking about the future of education or talking about EdTech, but I think we at SPJN have actually demonstrated this in practice. And there are several more initiatives that we have up our sleeves, let me put it that way. And we will roll them out one by one, because it is all technology-led. But how do you use technology for useful outcomes is something that we at SPJN are very, very focused on. So, Terry, back to you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you, Nitish. I would encourage those in the audience who have been listening to pose some questions to our panel. But the question which I wanted to ask the panel is related to whether COVID-19 has actually changed the structure of demand in the post-secondary industry in particular. In other words, like you can talk about the good things that Nitish is doing, or you can talk about how people reacted, but I noticed that Pratibha also did talk about what's the future. And so what I've noticed in other markets, in particular in China, is that the structure of demand is changing quite dramatically. It has already changed, particularly in postgraduate coursework education. The the products that you can sell now in China to people for postgraduate coursework education need to be radically different than what they were even a year ago, mainly because people have woken up to the fact that they can actually do part of their program in China while they're still employed and complete it at various universities around the world. And so this just changes the nature of this demand. It's less tied to getting to Australia or wherever. So could anybody comment upon, have they seen any permanent change in the structure of demand, in particular in post-secondary education?
I can sort of come in and say that, yes, I think it has changed. I think, Terry, what you say is correct, that people are really wanting to, really have the flexibility to pick up the structure as they want, when they want, and where they want, and how they want. And also, I think, so the flexibility in the delivery structure has definitely changed. People will come in for short courses, micro-credentials, go away, come back again, continue with some bit of it. So we are seeing that whole change, especially in slightly more mature markets, that's starting to happen. The second thing I think that's starting to happen is the content has changed. Like I think Stephen Rutter said earlier about how it is important to focus on human-centric skills as part of curriculum development. And I think universities and higher education institutions around the world are definitely more inclusive of this in terms of the future of education and content. And that's where I see the change will be with use of technology.
Another follow-on question of you. Amongst the Indian institutions, have they changed their capital asset allocation as between fancy new buildings and their digital environments, or is there still an arms race to invest in seats and fancy buildings and swimming pools and things like that?
It's a hybrid, Terry, that I think institutions are realizing, and I would say the new age institutions are realizing that the investment in digital technology is absolutely a mandatory. If they have to focus on the future and if they have to go into the next phase of their existence, I wouldn't say acceptability and excellence, I would say existence. They will have to invest in digital technology and interactive digital technology, which is going to satisfy the user, the learner, and the delivery content person. Because ultimately, it is going to be focused on what is there in the market and how do you differentiate yourself. And if you're not able to provide that as an institution, you're not going to get attracted. It's going to be a hybrid. I personally believe just digital technology delivery will not work, because whether you talk about students who are just out of school, they will want to interface in face-to-face time, in real face time as well. And that is where the hybrid thing will come out more stronger. I think like Nitish said, some bit here, some bit there, some bit online, and then how do you move into the world? With credits and flexibility, which is what the new education policy has come out to be, where you can actually get credits between countries. India was close to that. After 32 years, we've had a change in our education policy.
Thank you. Any other comments from...
I agree with Ravneet.
Pratibha, could you open up?
Yeah, sure. I agree with Ravneet. I think to continue on online learning, a blended approach, it has to be a long-term sustainable plan that education institutes adopt. And perhaps the directions that the Indian government has with the NEP 2020 would pave that path, definitely. The other aspect, Terry, which was in your previous question, is about the higher education sector in India. Now, when somebody wants to study a full-time post-graduation course and they want to do it on campus, they're looking at the experience, the exposure, they're looking at peer-to-peer learning, and whether or not the online or the hybrid will provide them, or they will prefer to do that, is how we witness over the time. But one sector, which is the working professionals, they will definitely now look at these upskilling and reskilling through online education, because they're the ones who are working, and they earlier probably were doing in remote learning, like a distant learning, but now with these digital, they can do a full-time course online and they're more familiar with it, and there's wider acceptability in employment even if you've done an online course. So for upskilling and reskilling in the employment sector for people who are already working, I think this is going to have a long-term benefit.
I know someone else wanted to make a contribution.
I was going to say, Terry, that I think it was this morning's Campus Morning Mail indicated that at least 50% of institutions are going to look at selling their real estate to invest into not only digital programs, platforms, and research. So I think that's critical right now, that they're indicating that people will come to the campus for collaboration and for peer-to-peer experiences. But as Pratibha said before, the hybrid will be the learning, and obviously Nitish has already got the platform for that experience. So I think that's ultra relevant.
Yeah, another thing that comes out of that, Stephen, is the whole area of margin compression. Namely, whenever I talk to presidents of the Australian universities, they are always very worried that the prices they can get for hybrid experiences are going to be lower than their traditional on-campus experiences, and therefore, how are they going to fund that shift of capital into coming up with these new products and new learning experiences? Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Terry, I just want to add to what the previous speakers had spoken. And way back, I think last June, we actually had a senior management meeting, and we said, do you really need four walls to deliver education? And how can you make online education even better than the face-to-face education? And they came up with some pretty amazing thoughts that I think I can share with everyone. And the first is collaboration with other universities. In the case of SP Jain, we tied up with 3 other European universities, keeping into consideration the time difference as an important parameter. So it was afternoon in India and morning in Europe. And so we actually developed a whole new model, what we call borderless education. And so SP Jain students collaborated with students from other universities. The guest speakers need not come physically anymore. They can be online. And so we got some of the best guest speakers from around the world who were very happy to be in their offices or homes and share their experiences with SP Jain students for maybe 1 hour. And so we were actually able to create a new appeal. And so if you look at our MBA students, I don't think we can club them all. Are they all on campus? Are they all online? Because each one is different. Someone still wants the on-campus experience, but there are others who are happy with the online experience too, because they may be, have 5 years work ex, and they may have families, they may have young children, we don't know their lives, or elderly parents that they need to look after, and they're happy with the online experience. So I don't think we can have one or the other as two fixed points. And I think, as one of the former speakers, I think it was Ramneet who said, flexibility. And so, you need to move on from just the purely on-campus experience to now offer on-campus, online, and a mix of both, which is hybrid. And let the customer choose, in this case, the student.
Can I just add something there as well, Terry, just as an additional point to what Nitisha said, and coming back to something that Rovneet said as well. And that is, I think you're right that there is potential margin compression by having a hybrid model. But I think we have to look at the volume increase that you'll get, and it will be significant. Not only will you get a significant increase in volume of the number of learners that you can impact. Take the Australian context of 727,000 students who come to the country. Imagine now a model where Deakin University are now impacting millions of students across India with bite-sized micro-credential programs that are delivered at the time that they want them, when they want them, in a model they want them. And that can include all sorts of things. And I'll go back to a little data point, because it's the only one that I have, and that is Professor Shirley Alexander, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Education at UTS, was on a summit that EduGrowth had a few weeks ago talking to the Chinese market. And she shared a statistic, and I may have the actual number a little bit wrong, but she looked at the decline in attendance at lectures throughout 2019 and 2020, so he was able to compare face-to-face versus online. And essentially, students, regardless of whether it was face-to-face or whether it was online, are simply not coming to lectures anymore. They are wanting a different learning experience, which comes back to Nitisha's point about reimagining the education system. If you are going to move to an online model, it requires all of that rethinking about what are you delivering, how are you engaging, how are you assessing, and that's the piece that I think that's really important for us to pause for a minute. We need to pause and remember you can have really crappy face-to-face learning and teaching and learning, as well as crappy online learning and the teaching and learning. Let's not make one higher or better than the other. I'm absolutely convinced that we will not return to a model that you may be thinking existed in the years gone by. And it will have a completely different model, and it will talk to different learners at the time they need it. So, and technology will enable it. Technology will be the driver of the innovation that you've been wanting for years. It's not going to be for the sake of it, it's going to be the driver.
Yeah, and can I just sort of add very quickly in there, Terry, that I totally agree with David, that it is going to be bite-sized, right time, right place, but also we need to make sure that, the point that Nitish was making, you actually see that the world becomes a one place for students to learn, engage, experience. I do believe that once the pandemic impact is over, we will have students move around. So there will be that lot of students that will sit on a plane and go for a 3-year degree. That's not going to go away, but this opens the acceptability and the range of what we can deliver to the world with the use of technology. And I think that is going to be an important part going into the future.
Can I add to that, which is absolutely fantastic, that potentially the ideal customer of your institution will change as well. The future work will probably dictate that an employer is going to buy a university degree for an employee, and it could go over 20 years. The National University of Singapore is already doing a 20-year degree, as well as Stanford. So you could employ someone and then say to them, you've got a university degree for 20 years, because all you need right now is that just-in-time experience in whatever function you need to upskill and build your capability.
One last comment on this topic before I move on to another one is that one of the other things I've noticed in particular in China is the integration via use of hybrid delivery models of work integrated learning with professional qualification type learning like ACCA or a CFA or whatever, the formal sort of postgraduate, say, degrees, and that didn't really exist before the pandemic and now is becoming fairly common. And that has in turn involved the integration of the Australian universities, or at least several of them, with very large players in the private sector who will often have 100,000 employers as customers, or one particular company has 800,000 students, and that's being integrated with the Australian university products. But this is causing a lot of trouble for those same universities who have been used to having an independent product which is not integrated with work, which is not integrated with large vocational education players. That's just a comment. Now, moving on to our last question, which David and Ravneet may be able to give me some comment on. Given that 42% of the edutech startups in Australia are largely K-12, what Ravneet mentioned with the new education policy in India of emphasising coding and various other things like that, what has been the impact of COVID-19, apart from the short-term inconveniences and the equity issues that you spoke of earlier, Pratibha? What has anybody got any comments on what have been the structural changes, either in India or Australia, that you think will arise out of this in the K-12 sector?
I'll begin with a really broad comment that I think COVID-19 on the edtech sector in Australia, and I don't think we would be different to other parts of the world, will end up having a potential two-speed economy. You'll have early stage startups that will sort of struggle to find their customer, but you'll have established businesses that in 2020 have had incredible years. Like, they have had unbelievable amount of revenue growth. So within, I guess as a broad term, I think established businesses have gone incredibly well. Those that weren't quite in the market will find it difficult. There is a challenge for any sector, jurisdiction, but especially Australia, to think about how do you find the next step. And because I've got the opportunity, I think it's Ravneet and Deakin University type partners, and I preface it by saying Deakin University is a partner of EduGrowth, it's the investment and innovation that will come in the next wave that will be incredibly important to the sector. But returning to the K-12 space, I think I can only talk about the Australian context, but what is very, very clear in Australia, and I didn't show the slides today, but I've got a set of them, but there is an emerging B2C play and a B2C or direct-to-consumer market that's coming about. That's not been the case in Australia, but it has very much been the case across Asia, Central Asia and Southeast Asia. And I think that will be an emerging space in Australia to be starting to impact it. And there are some leaders in that space already. You know, Cluey Learning is a nice example of a company that's, I think, about 3 years old. They publicly listed at the end of 2020 with about $140 million market cap. And their model was originally, I think, designed for an export market, but they're finding a really solid domestic market in Australia. But I think their interest into what Australia would typically consider a source market for international students, I think it'll become a way of a net exporter of our technology and our education through technology into the market. And that's, I think, what will happen in K-12 schools. Because parents are acutely aware of how difficult it is to be a teacher. At the end of 2020, any parent who had a child at home or children at home really understood deeply how hard it is to be a teacher and how much support they need. So I think you'll see a B2C market out of Australia.
Thank you. Pratibha or Ravneet, do you have any thoughts about how COVID has impacted the K-12 sector in a structural sense?
I think, Terry, it has, if I go back to what I find in India, and then maybe I think similar trends will start to emerge, if not already in other parts of the world, including Australia, is that, with India, there have been more challenges about what Pratibha said about the technology itself. I mean, the use of technology, accessibility of technology has been a big issue. So I think that COVID-19 has almost forced people to actually adopt and adapt to that. And that is a big mindset change as far as the K-12 sector is concerned here. In teaching and learning, the government of India has put in a lot of effort in how they are training the teachers of use of technology for delivery of education. So I see that given the scale, the size, and the complexity of India and its education system, if we get it right, it would be a huge segment, a huge market space for education companies, edtech companies, to look at how they can enhance the experiential learning of the K-12 sector. It's a very regulated sector still. It's a very structured sector, but technology has disrupted it already. And I see future disruption into the sector. And with NEP, perhaps the implementation will become a shade easier or simpler as we go into the future.
Ravneet, have you got any further thoughts?
I'd just like to add to what Ravneet said, and I feel that we should look at this as two things. One is the provider, which is the education institution, and the second is a platform, which is the tool or the app or person who's designing something that could be delivered. So as a provider, you have to be responsible to keep pace with the students' needs and the future. And as a platform, you have to be responsible to give them the experience and the comfort and the convenience that they require, as well as a lot of issues which we don't talk about, which is data privacy, responsible use of this technology, because this has all been thrown into face of very young students at a very fast rate. So how do we responsibly use it, and how, like I said, leverage it in a more strategic manner? And yes, the K-12 sector in India has adapted and adopted very well, but how we effectively use this learning and this skill in future will need a lot of direction from the Ministry of Education here, and the NEP probably already has started paving that.
And the difference between, I mean, you've got some very quickly growing K-12 oriented tutoring companies in India, which is almost sort of like a repeat and I'm an investor in some of them, I should admit, which is sort of like a repeat of what happened in China. But the difference I sort of see, though, is that there's not as strong a public sector K-12 system in India. And how will the politicians deal with these rapidly growing, privately funded, very wealthy, large digital K-12 companies vis-a-vis their public sector, which is a bit perhaps starved of resources and has a real stratification of the availability of digital delivery. Is that a tension that you see at all? No one.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely. I do see that sort of bridging happening, and I think that institutions, education systems, government policies, all of the stakeholders need to acknowledge and understand that if we don't put all the stakeholders together, and like Pratibha said, the focus of student, the institution, the learner, the teacher, all of them, and policies around to make it more seamless and more acceptable, it would be a challenge, especially for countries which are complex and which have sort of a diversified education system. It'll be a big, big challenge, but it all has to come together at some stage, and I have no doubt it will.
Thank you.
These are the early days, so as trends emerge, I'm sure that the PSUs will also.
Okay, we're just about to wrap up. So, has anyone got any final thought that they want to give in? So, 10 or 20 seconds. Perhaps staying with you, David. What would be your final thought?
My final thought is I think that a post-COVID world creates great opportunity for new business models and innovation, and it will be the accelerant of that innovation. It won't be the beginning of it. It will just accelerate that innovation.
Right, Ravneet, what would be your?
I would say opportunity, creativity, agility, and collaboration. If we follow all of those, we all will sort of move forward with a much better and a much more robust education system across the world over.
Thank you. Stephen?
What would education as a service actually look like? So bringing in the students, the educators, and industry together to co-create the future.
Thank you. Pratibha, your?
I feel we will continue to use digital as an enabler to make the experiences better for our students and our partners.
Nitish, your final thought.
I think the future of education is about reducing fees, not increasing fees. And we've actually made a plan how we can keep reducing fees every year through the use of technology. So you reduce costs and you pass on those costs by reduction of fees. And I think that's what's going to determine universities 4 or 5 years from today.
I agree totally with you, and I'm seeing this played out in China every day. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all of the speakers. You've made a great contribution, and thank you for the audience sticking with us to this point. And have a good evening or afternoon, all of you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, Terry.
Thank you.